The iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max were released September 2023, and I've been personally using the 15 Pro Max for over a month now. It's, as you would expect, a really great phone and exactly what you would want from Apple. A premium top-end experience with all the bells and whistles that inevitably come with a $1,000 plus price tag. There's been some controversy, mainly surrounding both overheating as well as the lack of durability, and we will touch on that, but overall here, this is definitely a high-end flagship experience.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and this is the iPhone 15 Pro, specifically the 15 Pro Max. And today, we're going to be reviewing it, talking about the pros, the cons, and most importantly, whether or not it's truly worth it. First off, this is an extremely expensive phone. You're looking at a minimum of $1,000 US. This 15 Pro Max, 256 gigs in Canadian, almost cost me $2,000 with taxes. That is a lot of money. I could buy a lot for $2,000, like a 15 Pro Max, or probably a couple kidneys. Not that I would know where to get a kidney, of course. Now, that's nothing new. You know, the 14 Pro was expensive, the 13 Pro, the 12 Pro, the 11 Pro, the 10S, the 10, these were all $1,000 plus phones. But that's American, and it's worth noting that in other countries, including Canada, but especially outside of North America, these things have been increasing in price seemingly every year. You've got conversion rates, you've got inflation, there's a whole bunch of different factors, but these phones only ever seem to get more expensive outside of America year to year, and that sucks. Now, if you're in America, I mean, you've got it pretty good when it comes to iPhones. And I do generally talk in American prices to keep things easy, basically. But I did want to kind of clarify here, while these phones are expensive enough in the US, they are almost unachievable in some other countries and places in the world. So for your money, you expect an experience that is going to be the best. It is going to be at least of the best. It's going to be one of the best, if not the best smartphone on the market. And the good news is that, as with most years, I think this is, in fact, probably the best all-round phone on the market. I absolutely think some Androids and different phones could beat it in some categories, but iPhone tends to do everything just almost the best, if not the best, right? The camera's always of the best. The display's always of the best. Design and build usually probably is the best. They're always at the top of their game in every single category, which makes them great all-round phones. More importantly, they run iOS, and if you're an iOS user, then you're looking at iPhone. You might not be looking at the most expensive 15 Pro, but if you're somebody who has money to spend and wants to spend it on a very good phone that could last you a very, very long time if you wanted to, this is a good phone to buy. Now, if you're a previous Pro user, I think 14 Pro users and 13 Pro users need not upgrade yet. I would wait at least another year, but if you're on the 12 Pro or older, I think it's maybe not a bad time to jump on. You get quite a few improvements, things like ProMotion, the dynamic island is really nice. Of course, there's been some significant camera improvements, battery life has gotten better, all these things, USB-C is great, but the experience really to me doesn't feel that different from my 14 Pro or even my 13 Pro from a couple years ago, if I'm being real. So I wanted to make sure that I made that clear. This is not a phone for most people. It is a phone for those who can afford it and want it, or YouTubers, I guess, like me. Trust me, if it wasn't for the YouTube thing, I would not be buying these phones. I really do not need them. Just on a personal level, it doesn't do anything that I'm really that excited about. USB-C is great, but aside from that, things like the action button, the titanium build, these are not things I needed. But I like having the latest phone for the sake of the YouTube channel because it gives me a point of comparison when reviewing older phones, right? So without further ado, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the iPhone 15 Pro.
So first off here, what is new, and also what is different from the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus? As said, people who want an iPhone are going to buy an iPhone. They don't really care about other flagships, at least generally speaking. So what does this have over the 15? Well, from the back you can tell immediately it's that third extra camera lens. Now there is a significant difference this year between the regular 15 Pro and then the 15 Pro Max. Normally it's just the size and the battery because of the size, but this year you actually get a 5x zoom lens on the Max and then a 3x, just like the 14 Pro and 13 Pro on the non-Pro Max. So 3x on the Pro, 5x zoom on the Pro Max. Does this make a huge difference? Probably not for most people. For me, I don't think so. I think you should just go for the size that fits you best. That's going to be the way to go unless you really want that extra zoom for whatever reason. For me, it's not a big deal. So that extra camera lens is the biggest thing that this has over the iPhone 15, as well as probably ProMotion, which is 120 Hertz. Basically, everything looks a lot smoother, more buttery. I would recommend trying it out in the store if you're not really sure as to what difference it makes. It's extremely difficult to show in a YouTube video. You gotta kind of just experience how smooth it really is at that 120 Hz versus only 60 on the 15. Also, just like last year, it's only the Pro phones that get the always on display with the variable refresh rate. I do think it's pretty bad this very standard Android feature is only on Apple's most expensive phones, but if it is something you want, you're gonna have to go up to the Pros to get it on iPhone. The Dynamic Island is on both the 15 and the 15 Pro this year, so that isn't a Pro feature anymore. The action button is a Pro feature. You still have the old ringer switch on the 15 and 15 Plus versus this button that can be mapped to any number of utilities in settings with this ridiculously nice UI. It's really out of the blue, nothing else in settings look like this, but it's nice. And since you can use Siri shortcuts, you can pretty much do anything with the button. Now myself, I've just been using it as a ringer. Yeah, I know I'm very boring, but you can do pretty much whatever you want with it. So that's a Pro feature apparently. You also only get USB 3 speeds with USB-C on the 15 Pro, though you do still get the USB-C port on the 15 and 15 Plus. If you transfer files a lot, it's going to be significantly faster using the Pro versus just an iPhone 15. Assuming you're actually using a USB 3 USB-C cable, because the one that comes with your phone is USB 2. Yeah, Apple really cheaped out there, but I digress. One big thing that's different this year from the 14 Pro last year is of course the build. It's titanium and aluminum now, as well as a bit thinner and more compact. I was actually surprised when I unboxed this thing. It feels significantly lighter to me than the 14 Pro. I don't think it's actually that much lighter, but it definitely feels lighter. And that's kind of nice. It's been a long time since Apple's actually reduced the thickness and weight of one of their smartphones. They've just been getting bigger year over year for the last while, which I've been generally okay with because typically that means better battery life. But if there's no downsides, I mean, hey, why not make the phone a bit thinner? As it turns out, there was a big downside, at least seemingly, and that was overheating. So let's talk about this and get these little controversies out of the way real quick. For starters, I was originally going to subtitle this video "Too Hot to Handle," and I mean that in the literal sense. These phones have suffered from overheating issues, which according to Apple is a software problem, not a hardware one. This has already been fixed with an iOS 17 update, and since then I haven't experienced issues. When I first got the phone, it was overheating like crazy. Even just taking pictures in portrait mode, the phone would get hot, to the point where it was uncomfortable to hold. As long as I was using my case, it wasn't too bad, but it was still noticeably warm. So you don't have to worry about it now, but I wanted to mention it because it's been definitely making the rounds in media. It's also said this update isn't damaging performance, which is great because I figured they would just underclock the processor. Apple actually claims the titanium and aluminum frame are better at dissipating heat compared to the former stainless steel. I'm skeptical of that, but in any case, the new update has fixed this completely and it's not something to worry about. Wanted to make it clear though because it's been making the rounds in media since the 15 Pro came out. The other big issue is durability. Whether or not you've seen Jerry Rig Everything's video, these phones do tend to crack a whole lot easier than the 14 Pro did. It is cheaper to repair now because of the way that they make the glass, so that's cool, but definitely not a huge fan of how it's weaker structurally. That being said, use a case. I use a case. I've always used a case. You should be using a case regardless. If you're concerned, get Apple Care Plus. It's a pain. I don't really want to complain too much about it because, I mean, glass is glass and glass breaks, right? But it's worth noting if you're concerned about durability, the 15 Pro is actually a step back this year. It's weird to see how Apple prioritizes different features and aspects of their phones. One nice change I do appreciate that's come with the new build, though it's not as noticeable with the screen protector on, is how much more comfortable this phone is in the hand. The edges of the frame aren't so sharp, but instead subtly rounded, helping it fit in the hand nicer, and even the display on the front has the glass curve into the frame. It's a really nice touch, albeit one sort of pointless as soon as you put on the very necessary case and screen protector. It's honestly funny how all these nice subtle touches that do genuinely make the phone feel really premium just don't matter because of how fragile this phone is. I'm gonna move on from the durability, but I do have to question whether or not the move to titanium from stainless steel was such a good idea. Although I suppose a lot of this might come from the way they're making the glass now. Either way, it is what we got, so there's no real use in overanalyzing it. Certainly, I wouldn't be unhappy if I had just bought a 14 Pro, then the 15 Pro comes out, because there seems to be some decent benefits to the older hardware. And the 14 Pro is a fantastic phone to look for on the used market, by the way, as stated in my recent iPhone buying guide, which I'll link in the description. Design-wise, aside from the titanium and softer, lighter feel, apparently it's 20 grams lighter, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it does make a real difference, as I mentioned. Even with this though, the 15 Pro Max is very similar to previous models, even going back to the 12 Pro. The camera module hasn't actually gotten too much bigger this year, which isn't a bad thing because honestly they've gotten almost comically huge recently, but hey, photos are better than ever, so we'll get to that in a bit. I also really love this natural titanium color, and by my biased calculations, this is easily the best color of the year. I generally have darker colored phones, so it's a nice change of pace, but I do think this is the color to get, not only because it looks great, but also because when the titanium scratches and the paint comes off, it's gonna clash with the other color options and be very noticeable. Just look back at Jerry Rig Everything's video as an example when he was scratching the frame. But with natural titanium, as the name would suggest, the color shouldn't be different, and so any scratches, blemishes really shouldn't be too noticeable. Mind you, I'm sure you'd be fine with the other colors, and whichever one you choose, it doesn't really matter because I'll say it for the 50th time, use a case. Battery life this year has been extremely impressive to me. Since I got the phone, I've made a point to really try to push the battery life on it. There's a few days where I've just been kind of moving around a lot, doing stuff around the house, and so I was able to keep YouTube playing pretty much all day. Like, I'm talking 8+ hours of YouTube playback, which is a lot, and I was still getting over 50% battery life remaining. Even now as I'm editing this, it's almost 9 p.m. and I've got over 4 hours of screen time here, and that includes a lot of things, including like I think there's a half-hour phone call, and yet I've still got 75% battery life. This is just really, really good, and I may not even charge my phone tonight, although I probably will out of habit, but this could get me 2 days, no problem. And I mean, to be fair, that should be expected, right? For $2,000 the Canadian, this thing better be pretty insane in all aspects, including battery life. For the display, we're looking at the same thing this year as we saw with the 14 Pro. The smaller 15 Pro is 6.1 inches with a resolution of 1179 by 2556, and the Pro Max that I have here is 6.7 inches with a resolution of 1290 by 2796. Do the numbers really matter? Probably not. Ultimately, this is a sharp, vibrant display that's of the best in class for sure. And notably, the 15 Pro has actually seen a small reduction in bezel size. It may not be super obvious because of the screen protector there, but they've actually just shrunk the phone around the screen, so the whole thing is slightly smaller now. One of those nice little touches. The dynamic island is still there in all its glory, and it's as well integrated as ever. Certainly one of the nicer features of the newer iPhones. You don't hear about Apple being too behind anymore with the notch situation, even though technically Android cutouts tend to be significantly smaller, and I believe it's because of the dynamic island being so well used throughout the operating system. This stuff has been around a year at this point, so I'm not going to go too in depth, but the fancy animations and intuitive integration throughout the OS is unmatched by probably any gimmick I've ever seen on a device like this. It's just so smooth and seamless. When watching a YouTube video and swiping up to the home screen, or listening to music and swiping up, for it to just shrink into the dynamic island and continue playing, it's both visually pleasing and practical. This is nothing new, but I did want to give the dynamic island some love in this review because I think it's probably one of the most underrated features in the greater smartphone landscape, if I'm being honest. Overall here, and I don't think it's too bold of me to say this is one of the nicest, most gorgeous smartphones ever built by any company. The durability has left lots to be desired, but from an aesthetic standpoint, this is a great looking phone front to back. And so, alright, we're getting through this. Let's move on to one of the biggest changes, the A17 Pro chipset. Not the A17 Bionic, but the A17 Pro. I'm not sure what ramifications this new naming scheme will bring in future years, but for the time being, this is, as usual, an absolutely insane performer with absurd numbers that just can't be used in nearly any practical application. And Apple is pushing actual console-level video games like Assassin's Creed Mirage and so on coming to iPhone, and that's pretty awesome. And ultimately, that's just scratching the surface of how powerful these processors really are. But in terms of real-life, day-to-day usage, I mean, it's just fast. Like my 14 Pro was, like my 13 Pro was. Unless you're coming from an older iPhone, potentially with a dying battery, performance may not feel like as big of an upgrade as you would expect. Not because it's not a big upgrade, mind you, but because there's only so much power iOS is going to utilize. What I'm saying is the things we do day to day, scroll through TikTok, Reddit, X, Instagram, watch YouTube, play some games, etc. These are things that don't even come close to tapping the A17 Pro's potential, because, I mean, they just don't need to. All this extra power is great, but it's not something that's going to impact real life usage a whole lot, even compared to, say, Apple's $600 iPhone 13 with its A15 chipset. On the other hand, there are some more pro-oriented tools that will better utilize the power, and, you know, having so much headroom means that this phone probably will never feel slow on any version of iOS, at least hopefully. And hey, that's pretty awesome, right? To be confident your phone can handle literally anything you throw at it. For $1,000, I would expect that at the very minimum. The other big pro feature that we see yearly are the upgraded cameras, and yeah, they're really good, shocker. If I sound a bit unexcited, I mean, the reason is pretty self-explanatory. Look, these are really good cameras, and I've been pretty impressed by some of the shots I've gotten. It's not leaps and bounds ahead of what I had with my 14 Pro, but it's a typical yearly upgrade, and that's fine by me. Notably, there's a big difference this year between the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. We already covered this, but 3x camera on the 15 Pro, 5x on the 15 Pro Max. Now this is probably unpopular, but I personally don't understand understand the hype behind these crazy long zoom ranges. I really don't see much downside in a 3x versus 5x versus the 10x and whatever crazy other options you might have on Android. With digital zoom, the 5x lens will get you 25 times zoom at maximum versus 15 times zoom with the 3x on the smaller Pro. Of course, you can always just crop in later though, so I think it's a moot point. I definitely wouldn't be normally shooting photos this far zoomed in. While I don't get the hype, I will say, after a month of using this phone, I can see some occasions where it might be useful to have some zoom. So yeah, I mean, the usefulness could be there, but for very specific situations. If you're not sure if you want the Pro or the Pro Max and are hung up specifically on which camera is better, just get the size of the phone you prefer. Honestly, this isn't something to worry about. I did get the Max in part because I wanted to try out the new lens. I mean, I do make YouTube reviews, but mainly I just wanted to shake things up and get the better battery life that comes with a larger size. So with this phone, we're looking at a 12 megapixel ultra wide lens, 48 megapixel main wide lens, and finally the 12 megapixel 3 or 5x zoom lens. In terms of quality, the main wide lens far surpasses the other two, and it should be the one you use at most times, I think. But they all do perform quite well and can produce some really stunning results. One of the best new features on the 15 and 15 Pro this year is the automatic portrait mode. This little f-stop icon shows up, and the photos you take can retain all the depth information without you having to switch over to the portrait mode in your camera. So you can change the bokeh and all that later after the fact without manually using the portrait mode. It's pretty cool. It's just a really nice small thing that I'm glad they didn't only give to the Pro phones this year. Photos are also saved larger by default now. Previously, even though the main camera is 48 megapixels, the 14 Pro would save photos at 12 megapixels. This year, the default is 24, and while you can switch back if you don't like the larger file size, it's really nice to get some properly higher resolution shots. While I do occasionally shoot RAW, which is going to give you some pretty massive 48 megapixel file sizes, like 75 megabytes a pop, the vast majority of the time, like most users, I just point and snap and never really bother editing my photos. Partly because I'm lazy and not a photo expert, and partly because I think these phones do tend to do a great job as is. None of the photos I've been showing are edited whatsoever, they're just straight from the 15 Pro Max. It's great to be able to snap photos and have confidence that they're gonna turn out, including in these low light situations. I got some really nice shots of the back of my car, and I mean, this is just so awesome. Here it's clear, it's sharp, with the colors and the bokeh just making for some really nice, pleasing images. There is still that issue with how light hits the lenses and causes like a ghosting effect, but that's not really something that's ever bothered me. It can be pretty bad in certain situations, but clean off your lenses, make sure they're not smudged, and it probably shouldn't be too bad. One thing worth mentioning as well is the different crop ranges. We saw last year the sort of fake 2x zoom that's really just cropping in the 48 megapixel lens down to 12, and this year now there's a couple more options with 24, 28, or 35 millimeters, aka slightly cropped in photos. I know there's more going on than just that, but I never find myself using these, and you can disable them in settings if you want to, so I'm not going to complain. More options like this is always nice to have. I'm not a photography expert by any means, and honestly, I'm just not going to bother taking a ton of time talking about these cameras. They're very, very good, and the versatility here is, as always, fantastic. I'm still not sure if I prefer the 5x over the 3x zoom, but I think at worst I'm indifferent, and for those who really want that zoom, it's going to be nice to have. Also, as I'm speaking here, I wrote nothing on the selfie camera. I should probably talk about it, right? I don't know, man, it's a selfie camera. It's 12 megapixels this year, as always, and I know it's very good. I did take some example photos, and yeah, I mean, it's a selfie camera. It does a great job. Not a whole lot to say. I'm a 23-year-old male who like never uses my social media, even though I probably should, at least for my business accounts. But anyways, video, as always, is fantastic. You've got ProRes and RAW options across the board, which I sort of mentioned. What's even to say? Maybe the 15 Pro isn't the best smartphone camera in every single situation, and other reviewers I've seen just tear it apart, but I really, really like it, and I don't think any user, whether average or pro, is going to be even remotely disappointed with it. This is one of those few areas you can generally feel the difference in quality for your money. The camera is the biggest step up from the lower tier models. And actually, this brings us full circle. Is the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max truly worth buying? The answer is yeah. Actually, yes they are, with that massive caveat of you as an individual being someone who has the money to spend on a phone like this. Personally, I think the improvements you get over the 15 and 15 Plus with the faster processor, camera setup, ProMotion, and even some of the more minor features like the titanium design, action button, even USB 3 transfer speeds, it adds up to quite a lot for an extra $200 or so. If you're gonna pay $800 for a smartphone anyways, why not just go up a little further? And I mean, that's really Apple's goal in all of this, and that's why they price things the way they are. The 15 is cheaper, but just just close enough in pricing that you might as well go for the next step up anyways, and bam, Apple's just gotten even more of your money. But capitalistic cynicism aside, this is an absolutely fantastic phone, and I know I'm really going to enjoy using it over the next year because I've already enjoyed using it over the last month. It's certainly not a stretch to say that you would enjoy it too. If you're looking at buying one of these, you want iPhone, I think this is a solid time to jump on board. And so with that, I actually think I'm about ready to wrap things up. This video kind of felt like a bit of a checklist of things to get through for me. What really struck me writing this is just how little of my experience with the phone in the past month has actually stood out. I don't have really any unique anecdotes or stories to tell. It feels so similar to my 14 Pro, and it just goes to re-emphasize how unnecessary it is to upgrade yearly like I have the tendency to do. But then a big reason I've tried to avoid being nitpicky like a lot of reviewers tend to be these days is because I'm extremely aware that most people buying this phone are likely currently using an iPhone anywhere from 2 to 5 years old. For users who are coming from a phone that's a few years old at least, this is an amazing phone, and one I can readily recommend with a clear conscience, even in spite of that price tag. Is it really worth $1,000? I don't know, man, that's up to the individual. But this is how much the top end of smartphones cost these days, so if that's what you want to purchase, then I think the iPhone 15 Pro and the 15 Pro Max provide what might just be the best smartphone experience out there moving into 2024. Emphasis on might before people flame me in the comments, please. Also, now that we're at the end here, little tidbit, people keep commenting and saying things about how I still have Twitter on my phone. Yeah, it's just because I haven't updated the app. In fact, I think I'm actually signed out and haven't been able to sign back in, so I might need to update the app now, finally. It's not like a protest or anything, I just have auto updates off, and kind of thought it was funny to keep Twitter around. Maybe I should like sell it on eBay like people used to do with those phones with Flappy Bird. But anyways, I thought I would mention that for those who have actually stuck around to the end.
And so with that, I think I'm right about done here. Hopefully this video, you found it interesting, maybe it helped you out, and if so, maybe hit that like button, consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me on my socials if you'd like to. We have a Discord server, come by, say hi, and as always, huge shout out to the channel members, you guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.